Have you ever stayed silent while people laughed at you, not because you were weak, but because you already knew the day would come when they would regret every single word? Most people would defend themselves the moment they were insulted, but Amara chose something far more powerful. She listened, smiled, and waited. Every morning as she walked through the glass doors of Kingswell Global Holdings, 3 women greeted her with bright smiles that disappeared the moment she turned her back. They switched to French. They believed the quiet young woman from a small African village couldn't possibly understand a single sentence. "Look at her shoes," one whispered with a laugh. "They're older than the company itself." Another giggled. "I heard she still sends almost all her salary back home. Imagine being that poor." The third rolled her eyes. People like her should never work in international companies. Their laughter echoed through the office. Amara heard every word, every insult, every joke, every cruel comment, yet she simply smiled politely, placed her worn notebook on her desk, and began working. Nobody knew she understood every sentence perfectly, because 6 years earlier, before anyone in that office had even heard her name, Amara had been studying in Paris on a full academic scholarship. She had lived there, worked there, dreamed there. French had become as natural to her as English. But life had not remained kind. When her father suddenly passed away, she abandoned her master's degree and returned home to care for her widowed mother and 2 younger brothers. Those years in France became a chapter she rarely spoke about. Not because she was ashamed, but because she had learned something valuable. People reveal their true character when they believe you know nothing. Kingswell Global had hired her only 3 weeks earlier as a junior project coordinator. Her resume was excellent. But because she dressed simply and avoided talking about herself, everyone assumed she came from an uneducated background. Everyone, except one person, Mr. Richard Bennett, the company's aging CEO. He rarely spoke, he simply observed while others judged appearances. He watched behavior. And what he saw inside his office disturbed him more each passing day. One afternoon, he stood behind the tinted glass overlooking the open workspace. The 3 women laughed again. This time they didn't even bother lowering their voices. In French, they mocked Amara's hairstyle, her accent, her family. Even her lunch. Amara quietly continued typing. No anger, no tears, no reaction. Mr. Bennett frowned. He wondered, why did this young woman never defend herself? Was she afraid, or was there something nobody else understood? The answer would soon change the future of the entire company. The following Monday began like every other. Amara arrived before 8, greeted the security guard with a warm smile, and settled quietly at her desk. She always preferred arriving early. The peaceful silence before the office filled with conversations reminded her of the university library in Paris, where she had spent countless mornings chasing dreams that life had unexpectedly interrupted. Within half an hour, the office was buzzing. Laptops opened, coffee machines hummed, phones rang without pause. Then came the familiar sound, the clicking of expensive heels. Claire, Nadine, and Solange walked into the department together, laughing loudly as if the office belonged to them. They were known for being the loudest employees in the building. Their confidence came not from exceptional performance but from years of friendship with middle management. As always, they smiled politely at Amara. "Good morning." "Morning," Amara replied warmly. The moment she looked back at her computer, they switched to French. "So innocent," Claire whispered. "I almost feel guilty." Nadine laughed. "Don't, she has no idea what we're saying." Solange leaned closer. "I heard she still lives with her mother." The 3 burst into laughter. Amara continued typing, not because the words didn't hurt. They did. Every insult landed like a tiny stone against her heart. But she remembered something her late father often said. "Never waste your strength proving your worth to people determined to misunderstand you." Those words had carried her through the hardest years of her life, so instead of reacting, she focused on her work. By lunchtime, another challenge appeared. The department manager, Mr. Collins, walked into the office carrying several large project files. "We've just received an urgent proposal from a European client," he announced. "I need volunteers willing to stay late this week." Silence. Claire avoided eye contact. Nadine suddenly became interested in her phone. Solange pretended to answer an email. Mr. Collins sighed. Before he could ask again, Amara quietly raised her hand. "I can help." The manager smiled with relief. "Thank you, Amara." The three women exchanged amused glances. In French, Claire muttered. "Of course she volunteered. She probably needs overtime just to pay her rent." Another wave of laughter followed. Amara simply picked up the heavy folders. She had learned long ago that dignity often speaks louder than arguments. That evening, while most employees hurried home, Amara remained alone in the office. She carefully reviewed every document, checked every financial figure, corrected formatting mistakes others had overlooked. Hours passed unnoticed. At nearly 9 o'clock, she finally leaned back in her chair. Just then, she heard voices approaching from the conference room. Claire, Nadine, Solange. They hadn't noticed the lights were still on in Amara's section. Their conversation continued in flawless French. "This project is impossible." "It doesn't matter," Claire replied confidently. "My cousin already told me the promotion is practically mine." Nadine frowned. "What about the interviews?" Claire smirked. "Those interviews are just for show. My uncle sits on the executive advisory board. We already know who's getting the position." The room fell silent. Amara slowly stopped typing. Her heartbeat quickened. "So the promotion wasn't supposed to be fair." Then Solange spoke again. "What if someone reports it?" Claire laughed. "Who? Certainly not that village girl." More laughter echoed through the hallway. Then came another sentence, one that changed everything. "The CEO doesn't know the documents have already been altered." Amara froze. "Altered?" She listened even more carefully. Claire lowered her voice. "If the European proposal succeeds, management will believe I prepared it. But it was rewritten yesterday." Nadine smiled. "No one checks those drafts anyway." The three women laughed again before leaving the building. The office became silent once more. Amara stared at the stack of files in front of her. Something wasn't right. She opened the proposal again, page by page, line by line. Then she noticed it. Several financial projections had been secretly changed. Profit margins no longer matched the original reports. Projected costs had been manipulated. If the proposal reached the client like this, Kingswell Global could lose millions of dollars and its reputation. Amara's stomach tightened. She now understood why Claire sounded so confident. If the project succeeded, she would take the credit. If it failed, someone else would carry the blame, most likely the quiet new employee who had stayed late to finish the paperwork. Instead of panicking, Amara took a deep breath. She opened the archived versions of every document. For nearly 3 hours, she carefully compared each revision, every edit, every deleted figure, every suspicious change. By midnight, she had discovered enough evidence to prove someone had intentionally manipulated the files. She saved copies, printed records, organized timestamps, and quietly placed everything inside a single folder. She never intended to accuse anyone without proof. Evidence always speaks louder than emotions. The next morning, the atmosphere inside Kingswell Global changed completely. Employees gathered around the conference room. Whispers spread across every department. Then Mr. Collins made the announcement everyone had been waiting for. "Ladies and gentlemen, our CEO has officially approved the launch of Kingswell Europe's newest regional office." Excited murmurs filled the room. There will be one promotion, one employee, Regional Operations Director. The position came with a luxury apartment in Europe, a company vehicle, international travel, and a salary nearly 10 times higher than most employees currently earned. Everyone gasped. Claire smiled confidently. She already believed the position belonged to her. Then Mr. Collins added one final sentence. "The final interview panel will be conducted entirely in French." For the first time, Claire's confident smile disappeared, and across the room, Amara quietly lifted her eyes from her notebook without saying a single word. She knew that everything was about to change. The announcement spread through Kingswell Global like wildfire. Every employee was talking about the promotion, a regional operations director, a luxurious apartment in Europe, an executive salary, international travel. For many, it wasn't just a promotion, it was a chance to change their entire lives. Claire wasted no time celebrating. She walked through the office with renewed confidence, already acting as if the position belonged to her. "I guess I'll need to start packing," she joked loudly. Nadine laughed. "You've practically won already," Solange added with a grin. "Let's hope they serve good coffee in Paris." The three women burst into laughter. Then, just as always, they switched to French. I almost feel sorry for everyone else. This competition is already over. The new girl won't even understand the interview questions. They glanced toward Amara. She simply smiled politely and continued organizing her files. Inside, however, she wasn't thinking about the interview. She was thinking about the folder hidden safely inside her desk. The evidence, the altered financial reports, the timestamps. The original drafts, she knew revealing them too early could create unnecessary chaos, so she decided to wait. The right truth presented at the right moment was far more powerful than an angry accusation. Over the next week, the office transformed into a battlefield. Employees stayed late. Everyone wanted to impress management. Some prepared presentations, others practiced speeches. Claire and her friends spent most of their time discussing how confident they felt, but very little time actually working. Meanwhile, Amara quietly handled project after project. Whenever someone needed help, she volunteered. When deadlines became impossible, she stayed late. She never complained. Even the office cleaner noticed. One evening he smiled and said, "You always leave after everyone else." Amara smiled back. "My mother says unfinished work steals peaceful sleep." The old man laughed. "Your mother sounds like a wise woman." "She is." Across the building, CEO Richard Bennett continued observing everything. For years he had believed leadership wasn't revealed during success, it appeared during pressure. And pressure had exposed everyone's true character. Some employees blamed others, some took shortcuts. Some chased recognition. Only one person quietly focused on solving problems. Amara. One afternoon he called human resources. "I'd like to see the employment records of our newest project coordinator." The HR director nodded. A few minutes later, Amara's file landed on his desk. He opened it casually, then stopped reading. His eyebrows slowly rose. Bachelor's degree, first-class honors, master's program, Université de Paris, Academic Excellence Award, fluent in English, French, Spanish, Swahili, Yoruba, and Portuguese. Richard leaned back in his chair. "So," he whispered to himself, she understood everything. Suddenly, weeks of silence made perfect sense. She hadn't been weak, she had been patient. The morning before the interviews, Richard walked through the office unexpectedly. Employees immediately stood straighter. Some pretended to work harder, others nervously greeted him. When he reached Amara's desk, he stopped. "How are you settling in?" "I'm enjoying the work, sir." "Any challenges?" Amara thought carefully before answering. "Every workplace has challenges." Richard nodded slowly. "And have your colleagues treated you well?" There was a long silence. Claire and the others secretly listened from nearby desks. Amara finally smiled. "I believe everyone teaches us something. Some teach us kindness, others teach us patience." Richard looked at her for several seconds, then he smiled. "A remarkable answer." Without another word, he continued walking. Claire rolled her eyes. Teacher's pet. Again, they laughed in French, still believing their secret language protected them. Finally, interview day arrived. The conference room had been completely transformed. A long, polished table stretched across the room. At the far end sat 5 executives. 3 local directors, 1 European consultant, and CEO Richard Bennett. Beside them sat a woman many employees had never seen before, Madame Elise Laurent, head of Kingswell Europe's executive board. She smiled politely as candidates entered, then greeted each one. In French, the room instantly became tense. Claire swallowed hard. This wasn't the simple conversation she expected. Madame Laurent began asking detailed questions about international business strategy. Claire understood only a few words. She forced an awkward smile, then answered. In broken English, the interview panel exchanged disappointed looks after only 15 minutes. Her interview ended. Outside the room, Claire tried to hide her embarrassment. It wasn't that difficult, she lied, but her pale face told a different story. Nadine entered next. Within 10 minutes, she was struggling even more. Questions had to be repeated. Her answers became shorter. Eventually, she admitted she couldn't understand French. The panel thanked her politely, then called the next candidate. One by one, every applicant failed to impress. The room grew quieter until only one name remained. Mr. Collins looked toward the waiting area. Amara. She stood calmly, straightened her simple navy blue blazer, picked up her notebook, and walked toward the conference room. Claire whispered under her breath, "This should be entertaining." The door closed behind Amara. Madame Laurent smiled warmly, then spoke fluent French. Good morning, Miss Amara. We appreciate your patience. Shall we begin? Without hesitation, Amara smiled and replied in flawless Parisian French. Good morning, thank you for this opportunity. It is an honor to meet all of you. The room fell completely silent. Madame Laurent blinked in surprise. One executive nearly dropped his pen. Richard Bennett simply smiled, exactly as he had expected, outside. The candidates waiting near the hallway heard French flowing effortlessly through the conference room. Claire frowned. Who is speaking? Nadine's eyes widened. That sounds like. Before she could finish, she recognized the voice. It was Amara. And for the first time since meeting her, the three women realized something that made their blood run cold. She had understood every insult, every joke, every cruel word from the very beginning. For several long seconds, no one in the interview room said a word. The executives looked at Amara with genuine surprise, not because she spoke French, but because she spoke it with the confidence and elegance of someone who had lived in France for years. Madame Elise Laurent smiled. It has been a long time since I've heard such natural French from someone outside Europe. Amara thanked her politely. I had wonderful teachers, but life itself became my greatest classroom. The answer immediately caught everyone's attention. This wasn't someone who had memorized a language, this was someone who had lived it. The interview continued. Madame Laurent switched between French and English without warning. Amara followed every question effortlessly. She explained international logistics, cross-border negotiations, risk management, and how cultural understanding could strengthen business relationships. Each answer was calm, thoughtful, and supported with real-life examples from her studies and previous internships in Paris. One executive leaned toward another and whispered, "She's the strongest candidate we've interviewed today." Richard Bennett remained silent. But inside, he already knew the truth. He hadn't hired Amara by accident. He had seen potential in her from the very beginning. What impressed him now wasn't her intelligence, it was her humility. After nearly 40 minutes, Madame Laurent closed her notebook. I have one final question. The room became quiet. If you become regional operations director, what would be your first leadership priority? Amara paused for a moment before answering, then she smiled gently. I wouldn't begin by changing policies. I would begin by earning trust. Several executives nodded. She continued. A successful company isn't built only by talented people. It's built by people who feel respected. When employees fear embarrassment, they hide mistakes. When they feel respected, they solve problems together. I believe respect creates better results than fear ever can. Silence filled the room. Not an awkward silence, a respectful one. Madame Laurent slowly smiled. Excellent answer. As Amara prepared to leave, Richard Bennett spoke for the first time. Miss Amara, she turned. I have one question. Certainly, sir. His eyes met hers. You studied in Paris. Yes, you've spoken fluent French throughout this interview. Yes, then why, did you never tell anyone you understood French? The room became completely still. Even the executives looked curious. Amara took a slow breath, then answered honestly. Because I wanted people to show me who they really were. Nobody moved. She continued. If I had told everyone on my first day, they would have been careful with their words. But silence has a strange way of revealing character. I learned more about people by listening than I ever could by speaking. Richard Bennett slowly nodded. No one argued because everyone knew she was right. Outside the conference room, Claire, Nadine, and Solange waited anxiously. The door finally opened. Amara stepped out with her usual calm smile. She simply thanked the interview panel and walked away. She didn't look at the three women, she didn't smirk, she didn't celebrate. That quiet confidence made them even more nervous. What happened? Claire asked. Amara smiled politely. It was a very good conversation. Then she walked toward her desk. The three women stared after her. For the first time, they felt small. An hour later, Richard Bennett called an emergency executive meeting. Only senior management was invited. The interview results could wait. There was something far more important. Once everyone was seated, Richard placed a thick folder on the table. I received new information regarding the European proposal. The directors exchanged confused glances. Richard opened the folder. Inside were printed emails, document histories, financial comparisons. And timestamps, everything had been carefully organized. He looked around the room. Someone deliberately altered the financial projections before they reached our clients. The room fell silent. One director frowned. Do we know who? Richard nodded slowly. We have strong evidence. Without saying another word, he connected his laptop to the conference screen. One by one, the original documents appeared, then the edited versions. Every unauthorized change was highlighted. Every login time was recorded. Every digital signature had been traced. There was no room for excuses. The evidence pointed to one employee, Claire. Her face instantly turned pale. Sir, I can explain. Richard raised a hand. No, you've had many opportunities to tell the truth. You chose deception instead. She tried again. It wasn't only me. Nadine lowered her head. Solange began crying quietly. The truth unraveled within minutes. They had secretly changed the proposal, hoping Claire would receive credit if it succeeded. If it failed, they intended to blame the newest employee, Amara. Several executives looked shocked. One director whispered. They were willing to destroy someone's career. Before it had even begun, Richard's expression hardened. There is no place in this company for dishonesty. Security was called. Claire's employee badge was collected first, then Nadine's, then Solange's, without shouting. Without drama, they were escorted out of the building. As the office watched in stunned silence, the same women who had once walked through the halls with arrogance now left carrying only small cardboard boxes filled with their personal belongings. Not a single employee applauded. The silence itself was enough, because everyone understood one thing: pride had opened the door for them, dishonesty had shown them the way out. The following morning, the atmosphere inside Kingswell Global felt completely different. The usual laughter had disappeared. Employees spoke in quiet voices as they gathered in the company's main conference hall. Everyone knew something important was about to happen. Rumors about yesterday's investigation had already spread through every department. At exactly 9 o'clock, CEO Richard Bennett walked onto the stage. Beside him stood Madame Elise Laurent and the members of the executive board. Richard looked across the room before speaking. Good morning, everyone. His calm voice instantly silenced the hall. Yesterday reminded us of something very important. A successful company is not built only on profits. It is built on honesty, respect, and character. He paused for a moment. Unfortunately, several employees violated those values. As a result, they are no longer part of Kingswell Global. The room remained silent. No one seemed surprised. Everyone had witnessed the consequences of dishonesty. Richard continued. However, I would also like to recognize someone whose actions protected this company from a very costly mistake. The large screen behind him lit up. A single photograph appeared. Amara. Soft applause echoed through the hall. She looked genuinely surprised. Richard smiled. Miss Amara, would you please join us on stage? For a brief second, she hesitated. She had never enjoyed being the center of attention, but after taking a deep breath, she walked slowly toward the stage. Every eye followed her. Employees who had barely noticed her during her first weeks now watched with admiration. When she reached the stage, Richard handed her a small folder. Inside was an official appointment letter. He looked at her proudly. After careful evaluation of every interview, every project, and every decision made during the past month, the executive board has reached a unanimous decision. Madame Laurent stepped forward with a warm smile. In my 23 years of interviewing international leaders, I have rarely met someone who combines intelligence with humility the way you do. She opened the folder. It is my honor to officially appoint you as the new Regional Operations Director for Kingswell Europe. For a heartbeat, the room was completely still. Then thunderous applause erupted. Some employees stood to their feet, others smiled proudly. Even those who barely knew Amara felt that the right person had won. Amara accepted the letter with trembling hands. Tears gathered in her eyes, not because of the promotion, but because she wished her father could have witnessed this moment. She quietly whispered to herself, "We did it, Dad." Richard noticed the emotion in her eyes. "You've earned this." She nodded gratefully. "Thank you, sir." Richard then turned back toward the audience. "Before we conclude, I'd like to ask our newest director one final question. The room became silent once again. Amara, after everything that happened, after hearing people insult you day after day, why didn't you seek revenge when you finally had the chance? Everyone looked toward her, even the executives leaned forward. Amara smiled gently. My father used to tell me, oh, when someone throws mud at you, you don't have to throw it back. If you keep walking with dignity, the mud falls away on its own. She paused. I never wanted anyone to lose their job. I only wanted the truth to be known, because revenge may satisfy anger for a moment, but truth changes people forever. The hall fell into respectful silence. Those simple words touched everyone more deeply than any speech could have. Richard slowly began clapping. Within seconds, the entire hall joined him. It wasn't applause for a promotion, it was applause for integrity. That evening, after the celebration had ended, Amara quietly returned to her desk to collect her belongings. She noticed something lying beside her keyboard, a small handwritten envelope. Inside was a simple note. It read, Your kindness taught this office a lesson no training program ever could. Congratulations. There was no signature. She smiled. Sometimes appreciation didn't need a name. She carefully folded the note and placed it inside her notebook, the same worn notebook she had carried since her university days in Paris. As she walked out of the building, she looked back one last time. Only a month earlier, she had entered those doors as an overlooked newcomer. Now she was leaving as the company's newest regional director, not because she had spoken the loudest, not because she had humiliated anyone, but because she had remained true to herself when it was hardest to do so. Months later, Kingswell Europe's new branch became one of the company's most successful offices. Employees often said that working under Amara felt different. She remembered everyone's names. She listened before making decisions. She encouraged ideas from interns as eagerly as she did from senior managers. People no longer feared making honest mistakes. Instead, they worked together to solve them. Productivity increased. Employee satisfaction reached record levels, and the company flourished. One afternoon, a newly hired employee nervously admitted, I'm afraid I'll disappoint everyone. Amara smiled warmly. I once started exactly where you are. Talent opens doors, but character decides how long they stay open. The young employee never forgot those words, neither did anyone else who worked with her. Narrator's closing moral. Never underestimate a quiet person. Silence does not always mean weakness. Sometimes it means wisdom. The people who judge others by their clothes, accents, or backgrounds often reveal more about themselves than about the person they are mocking. Respect is free, kindness costs nothing, and the truth, no matter how deeply it is buried, always finds its way into the light. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories filled with wisdom, justice, and unforgettable life lessons. And tell us in the comments, if you were in Amara's place, would you have revealed the truth immediately, or waited for the perfect moment?